So imagine your pops beating the living crap out of you and then afterwards leaving Earth for months, and the next time you see him, he has another kid. How would you feel? Let's talk about it. Yo, 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 what's up? I'm Seyr, and welcome to my corner of the internet. And on this episode, episode 3, we'll be discussing season 2 of Invincible, including the Adam Eve special, which was dropped months before season 2 dropped. So, yeah, let's get into it. So, 2 years pass by, and it's basically sort of radio silence from the Invincible crew as they're animating and preparing season 2. But at the time, we didn't have any dates or anything up until in July when they decide to release a special titled Invincible Presents Adam Eve. This was titled as episode 0, and it basically gives us the backstory of where Eve comes from and how she got her powers and the chaos that ensued afterwards with her having to deal with being able to manipulate matter on such a detailed way. And she ends up the big fight of the special is her fighting her own siblings who were created in the same lab she was, just not by the same doctor. And yeah, it's a very touching story. It's yeah, it touches on so many things that will also kind of be important moving forward. But it also gives us this backstory of where Eve comes from. So now it's time for season 2 to start. Season 2 begins November 3rd, 2023, and is going to be broken down into two parts, with the first 4 episodes airing in November and the last 4 episodes airing in March of this year. Alright, so let's get into it. Season 2, episode 1 is titled A Lesson for Your Next Life. So, on this episode, we start in an alternate Earth where Mark and Nolan decided to join forces and they're basically wreaking havoc on the entire Earth. This scene serves as an introduction to Angstrom Levy, who is a multiversal traveler. And this season basically also deals with like choices and how your choices influence your life going forward. So after the whole alternate Earth scene, that's when we actually start the episode on our own Earth, where we still see Mark dealing with what happened when his father just pummeled him. Cecil wants to make a few changes to the Guardians, so he makes Immortal, who is revived yet again, into the new team leader. He also employs Mark as his backup, basically his main guy who he calls when shit is not looking okay. Langstrom breaks the Maulers out of prison and he asks them to build him a machine where he can take all the knowledge of his multiversal selves and combine them into just his one mind and combine all the information where he can help all the different universes in whatever way he can. But Cecil tasks Mark to go and stop the whole operation. And as the Maulers were fighting Mark, Ekstrom says he refuses to build his utopia on blood and he takes off the helmet and he blows the entire building up, killing almost everyone, with the surviving members being Angstrom himself, one Mauler twin, and Mark. And that's it in a room full of like 100+ people. Episode 2, titled In About 6 Hours, I Lose My Virginity to a Fish. This is Mark's graduation, but he isn't there for a major part of it because he's busy stopping Doc Seismic. Doc Seismic, we met him the last season, and he's a guy who manipulates elements. And Eve tries to help with rebuilding Chicago after Nolan and Mark's fight. We also get introduced to Shapesmith, who is the Martian that switched places with one of the astronauts last season. Cecil calls up Mark again, and this time it's to settle a debt that his dad made when he killed the king of the ocean, basically. So Cecil takes Mark to the Atlanteans in order for them to appease their loss in whatever way they want to. And at first he's under the assumption that he's supposed to marry the queen of the ocean. But when he gets there, he's told that that custom was abolished years ago, and instead he's gonna have to fight a kaiju. So he fights this kaiju and he actually ends up winning. And this takes us into episode 3, titled This Missive, This Machination. So, the first half of this episode is mostly focused on Alan the alien. We learn his background and his people, the Utopians, and we meet the coalition of planets. And the leader of the coalition of planets is a guy named Thaddeus. So, Thaddeus pulls Alan aside and he tells him that he thinks there's a mole in the camp and he tasks him with finding the mole. But before Alan could even do anything, 3 Viltrumites pop up and they're trying to get information from Alan on Nolan because they heard that he abandoned his post on Earth when he left on the last episode of season 1. Alan refuses to give these Viltrumites any information and he suffers for it. He ends up getting nearly killed and he's on life support until Thaddeus turns off his life support system and says, "Forgive me, Alan." So on the second half of the episode, we are back on Earth. Mark is then approached by Athraxan, these bug-like humanoid creatures from their own planet named Thraxa. So this guy tells Mark that Thraxa is in danger and Mark is the only person who can save them. But this turns out to be a ruse, because when he gets to Thraxa, like everything seems normal up until he gets to the monarch, the person in charge of the entire place, and he finds out that it's his dad. And this takes us into episode 4, which is the end of the first part of season 2, titled It's Been a While. The episode starts on Nolan immediately after leaving Earth, and we catch up on where his headspace has been and what he's been up to during the time. We find out that he nearly ended his life until he ran into the Thraxans, who were also gonna die up until he saved them. And that's how he became the Thraxans' monarch, basically. And he takes Mark into his castle, or whatever it is, his house, and he shows him his little brother. Mark is pissed because at this time it's only been like a few months since the whole thing with them in season 1, and now Nolan has another kid with another woman who is his wife again, essentially leaving Mark and Debbie. Essentially leaving Mark and Debbie. While Mark and Nolan are talking, the 3 Viltrumites pull up again and chaos ensues, basically. They start fighting and Nolan tells Mark to take his little brother and his wife into a safe place, but they end up getting caught by one of the Viltrumites. But Nolan comes in and is able to save them by killing the guy. And the remaining 2 Viltrumites end up in a fight with both Nolan and Mark. And Nolan and Mark end up sort of winning up until the first guy that he killed comes back. Turns out he was not as dead as he seemed. And he breaks Nolan's spine before collapsing himself. And he calls the Viltrumites to come pick up Nolan. And General Krieg, who is a general of the Viltrumites, tasks Mark with taking over his dad's mission. And back on Earth, Debbie is beginning to move on from Nolan. and Donald, who is the second in who is the second in command to Cecil in the GDA, is suspicious of a lot of things. Like, on episode 7 in season 1, he blew himself up to basically get rid of Nolan, but it didn't really do anything. But here he is again. And then he slowly unravels over the course of the season, finding out about who and what he is now. And this brings us to the end of part 1 of season 2. Part 2, beginning with episode 5, wouldn't be released up until March 2024, with episode 5 airing on the 14th, titled This Must Come as a Shock. So this picks up directly from Thraxa, as it was torn apart during the fight between Mark Nolan and the other Viltrumites. And Mark, after recovering, helps rebuild Thraxa. But Nolan's wife on Thraxa asks Mark if he can go back home with his little brother because they have a limited lifespan of only like a year, while his brother, because he's mixed with Viltrumite DNA, is likely to live a whole lot longer than that. Donald confronts Cecil about what they did to him, and Cecil shows him. Donald confronts Cecil on what happened to him because now he remembers that he blew himself up to kill Nolan, and yet he's still alive. And Cecil shows him the skeleton that they used to revive him. And this takes Donald by surprise, and he's shaken up a bit by the whole thing. But then an emergency comes up where there's a spaceship from Mars that's heading to Earth, and it turns out that the guy who was taken over by the Circuits is the one controlling everything. And Cecil then tasks the Guardians, Mark and Eve, to stop the aircraft from reaching Earth. Earthside, Rex, Kate, and Ray are called in for an emergency caused by the Lizard League, and they end up almost dying. At the end of the episode, Rex has a gun to his head by the leader of the Lizard League. In space, the Guardians aren't having much luck either with their fight with the Circuits. So this takes us into episode 6, titled It's Not That Simple. It picks up immediately with King Lizard holding the gun to Rex's head, and he actually pulls the trigger and he shoots him in the head, but Rex survives, and he actually kills King Lizard himself. And it's revealed that Shrinking Ray survives too, because I think in the last minute she got really, really small. Back in space, the Guardians end up dealing with the whole Circuit thing, and they save the guy who was being held captive by the Circuits, and they come back home. So on Earth, Debbie decides to raise Mark's little brother, and she names him Oliver after her own dad. And Rick, who was introduced to us in episode 6 of season 1, who is Will's crush, comes back, and essentially the same process that was used on Donald to bring him back is used to bring Rick back. And Mark and Amber deal with their relationship issues, and Ekstrom goes back to his home Earth. Episode 7, titled I'm Not Going Anywhere, finds Mark and Amber going to Comic-Con. Immortal goes on leave. While Mark and Amber are on a date, another Viltrumite named Anissa interrupts their date. Anissa threatens to kill Amber if Mark doesn't cooperate. And so Mark cooperates, and they talk with Anissa basically trying to get Mark to switch over to the Viltrumite side of ruling the entire world, but Mark doesn't really feel it. So after killing a kaiju, Mark and Anissa get into it themselves. After their whole fight, with Mark still being adamant on the fact that he's not going to join the Viltrumites side. Anissa leaves and she goes back to the Viltrumites prison where they're holding Nolan. So Ellen is just flying in space when he bumps into the Viltrumite prison and he gets noticed, and Anissa then goes out to essentially take him prisoner. So he fakes being knocked out so that he can get access to the prison because he also has his plan to get Nolan out of the prison. By the end of the episode, Mark gets a phone call and it's Angstrom, and Angstrom has both Debbie and Oliver. The final episode of season 2 is titled I Thought You Were Stronger. So after the phone call, Mark rushes home and Ekstrom basically takes him on a multiversal tour, essentially prepping him for when Angstrom, is going to kill him. But while Mark is gone, Debbie talks a bit of smack about Angstrom, and it gets to the point where Angstrom gets angered and he breaks Debbie's arm into two. So when Mark comes back and he finds his mom with her arm in two pieces, he loses it, and then they basically fight as they're going through different universes until they end up on this one universe where Mark just goes insane and he essentially kills Angstrom in almost the same way that his dad almost killed him. And after Angstrom dies, he realizes that he's stuck in this universe because Angstrom was the only one who could access different universes. While he's talking to himself, a portal opens up and it it turns out it's the Guardians, but 20 years older than he's used to. And it turns out that the Earth without Mark there became a shit show. So they came back to get him and get him back to his time. So Mark gets home, but he's still dealing with the fact that he just killed someone. This was the first time he's ever actually intentionally killed someone. We also find out that Duplicate is actually still alive because because her original version has always been kept away, hidden. Ellen is being processed into the Viltrumite prison. He meets up with Nolan. They pass each other in the hallway and they communicate telepathically. At the end of the episode, Nolan says he misses his wife. And yeah, that's Invincible season 1 and 2 and the Adam Eve special so far. I don't really know when season 3 will be coming up, but I am eagerly waiting. It is an incredible, impeccable, just well done series in animation, and the mere fact that they don't hold back on the gore, on the blood, on the topics they talk about, because there's a range of topics that they talk about that are mostly adult, if not all adult. And yeah, adult animation is having a serious boom right now, and I'm excited. Thank you for joining me on my corner. This has been episode 2, Invincible. I'll see you on the next one. Peace.